Bioluminescent marks on her throat were fading, and she knew what that meant. Arena pressed her back against the cold durasteel wall of the maintenance corridor. Four small bodies curled against her like warm stones. She had counted her breaths for the last 6 hours, a Solvethi discipline she had learned in the war, when breath was the only thing that belonged to you. 1, 2, 3. The ship hummed around her, indifferent as a god. Somewhere above, in the pressurized decks, the crew of the derelict freighter Tess Resolute had no idea she was here, tucked into the bones of their vessel like a secret the universe hadn't decided to tell yet. She had commandeered their emergency life support junction, rerouted just enough heat to keep the four girls from shivering, and eaten nothing in 2 days. The marks on her throat, the Solvethi bioluminescent sigils that indicated a mother's vital bond with her young, were dimming to a pale gray. When they went dark entirely, she had been told by her own mother long ago, it meant the body had decided to stop fighting. Arina was not ready to stop fighting. She looked at them in the low amber glow. Sylve, the oldest at 7 cycles, who slept with her fists clenched even now. Beneath her, Ren and Mira, twins at 4 cycles, pressed so tightly together they seemed like one creature. And at the bottom of the pile, Tay, barely 2, who had not made a sound in hours, and whose small chest rose and fell with a rhythm Arina checked every few minutes because she could not stop herself. She had been a general of the Solvethi Third Fleet. She had commanded 16 warships and 4,000 soldiers, and she had never once flinched at a tactical decision. And now she sat in the dark of a human freighter, hiding from the universe, checking a 2-year-old's breathing, and wondering if she had made a catastrophic error in trusting that anyone, anywhere, would let them simply live. The sound of footsteps changed. They had been distant before. Maintenance rounds, predictable, every 4 hours. But these were different, slower, irregular. The footsteps of someone who had stopped following their schedule. Arina pulled Sylve closer and pressed a finger to her own lips, though the child slept, and waited. She had survived wars. She would survive this too. She just had to survive the next 10 seconds first. She had earned her rank the way most Solvethi generals earned theirs, not through family or politics, but through the particular kind of suffering that transforms a soldier into something harder and more necessary. Arina had grown up on Velthos, the cold moon that orbited the gas giant Kaelvan, where the winters lasted 3 years, and the community that raised you was also the community that expected you to die for them. She had joined the fleet at 16, fought her first engagement at 19, and buried her first soldiers at 20. By 42 cycles, which translated to roughly 32 human years, though the comparison was always imprecise, she had command of the Third Fleet and a reputation for tactical precision that bordered on legend. And then the war had ended not with victory, but with betrayal. The Nexavani Accord, the peace treaty that the Solvethi High Council had signed with their oldest enemies, had contained a clause buried so deep in diplomatic language that most soldiers hadn't understood it until the consequences arrived. Solvethi commanders with more than 50 engagements on their records were to be classified as war assets and transferred to joint custody. It was, in every meaningful sense, a surrender of their best military minds. Arina had refused. Refusing a High Council directive was not something Solvethi generals did, and she had known what it would cost her. She had resigned her commission in the same breath. What she hadn't expected, what she had been naive enough not to anticipate, was that the Council would also revoke her citizenship, her property, and her legal status as a person. That was the word they used in the official document. Person. As if it were a title that could be rescinded. She had been a widow for 3 years by then. Her husband Kelvar had died in the 42nd engagement, the one that had broken the Nexavani Southern Fleet. She never talked about him. She thought about him every day. The girls had no one else. So she had done the only thing a Solvethi general with no legal standing, no home, and no allies could do. She had found a way off Velthos before the enforcement teams arrived, using favors owed by former soldiers, and she had started moving. The galaxy was large. Humans controlled significant shipping lanes in the neutral zones. And humans, this was what she had heard, what she had tested carefully, were unpredictable in ways that sometimes looked like mercy. She had bought passage on the Tess Resolute under a false manifest, listing the girls as cargo components. It had cost her last material valuables. 2 days into the transit, the ship's life support had fluctuated, and she had realized, too late, that the manifest had placed them in an unlisted cargo bay with no active heating. She had found the maintenance corridor and bought them 12 hours of warmth at the cost of whatever remained of her own caloric reserves. The footsteps were getting closer. Liam had only taken the maintenance round because he couldn't sleep. He was the Resolute's junior engineering officer, 26 years old, originally from Bristol, and possessed of a particular personal flaw that his older sister had identified when he was 9. He cared too much about things that weren't his problem. It had gotten him into fights in school when he defended smaller kids. It had gotten him fired from his first job when he reported a safety violation. It had gotten him posted to the Resolute, which was about as far from Earth as a junior engineer could get, because the shipping consortium that employed him had decided he was more useful out here, where his tendency to notice things other people ignored was at least occasionally directed at engine diagnostics. He almost walked past the junction panel. The heat signature was wrong. He noticed it because the thermal readout on his wrist unit flickered. A drain he didn't recognize. He stopped, backtracked, knelt down, and pressed his hand against the panel housing. Warm. Warmer than it should be. He opened the service hatch. The amber light fell inward, and for a moment his brain simply refused to process what he was seeing. A woman, not a human woman, clearly not, with the pale silver skin and the ridge structure along the jawline and the marks on her throat that glowed faintly like dying stars, sitting with 4 small children pressed against her, looking at him with eyes the color of deep space and the expression of someone who had already decided exactly how this ended and had accepted it. He said the first thing that came into his head. "Oh, hi." The children didn't wake. The woman didn't move. Her eyes tracked him with the kind of absolute stillness that Liam associated with animals that had calculated exactly how close the danger was. He should have called the captain. He knew he should have called the captain. He had a protocol, and it existed for a reason. And the reason was that stowaways on freight vessels were a serious safety and liability issue. He didn't call the captain. Instead, he sat down cross-legged on the floor of the maintenance corridor, making himself smaller. He wasn't entirely sure why, only that it seemed important, and said, "You look cold. I mean, you look like you're keeping them warm. Are you cold?" She stared at him. "I have a meal bar," he said, and reached very slowly into his jacket pocket, and produced it, and held it out across the space between them. "It's peanut butter flavor. I don't know if that means anything to you." He would think about that moment for a long time afterward. The way her expression shifted, not into relief, not immediately, but into something more complicated. Something that looked, underneath all the armor, like the particular pain of a person who had not expected kindness and did not know what to do with it. She didn't take the bar, but she didn't look away either. Something was wrong with the human's offering ritual. Arena knew enough about human contact protocols to understand that the extended hand was non-threatening. They used it as a greeting and as a transfer gesture. She had read that in the intelligence briefs the fleet had circulated during the neutral zone negotiations. But he had also made himself smaller, which in Solvethi body language was a posture of submission before a superior, which was confusing because she was the one hiding in the wall with 4 children and no food. He was clearly not submitting to her. He was doing something else. She couldn't classify it. "I'm Liam," he said, apparently to fill the silence she had allowed to extend too long. "I know what you are doing," she said, because it seemed important to establish that she was not ignorant, only strategic. He blinked. "What am I doing?" "You are attempting to appear harmless." "Yeah," he said, with a small exhale that might have been amusement. "That's pretty much exactly what I'm doing. Is it working?" She considered. Marginally. Sylvain chose that moment to wake up, as she always did. All at once, eyes open, immediately alert. She looked at Liam. Liam looked at Sylvain. Sylvain said in perfect flat Solvethi, "Mother, why is there a pale one in the wall?" "He found us," Arina said. "Are we being taken?" The word Sylvain used was the Solvethi word for arrested or conscripted, a word children on Velthos learned early because it had happened to too many families. Arina felt something tighten in her chest. "Not yet," she said. Liam, who clearly didn't understand any of this, had been watching their exchange with the expression of someone desperately trying not to seem like he was desperately trying to follow along. He held the meal bar out again, this time toward Sylvain. Sylvain looked at it, looked at Arina. Arina, against everything her strategic instincts screamed at her, gave the smallest nod. Sylvain took the bar. The human smiled, a full expression, teeth showing, the particular kind that Arina knew was meant to indicate warmth, but which in Solvethi culture was a threat display. She made herself not flinch. She reminded herself, context. They did not mean it as threat. They simply wore their warmth in the wrong shape. She had spent years reading enemies. This one was not an enemy. She was not certain what he was yet. He sat there for another moment, and then he said, "I'm not going to tell anyone you're here. I just need to know one thing. How long before you have somewhere to be? She stared at him. Why does that matter to you? Because I need to know how much food to bring, he said simply. The tightening in her chest became something else, something she did not immediately have a classification for. She told him 4 days. The transit time to Sifara Station, where she had a contact, a former soldier who had gotten out early enough to establish legitimate residence. 4 days. He nodded as if this were a completely normal logistical problem, as if he were simply calculating fuel reserves or cargo weight. Peanut butter, or do you have dietary restrictions I should know about? She told him about the girl's protein requirements and the Solvethi sensitivity to certain human processed sugars. He listened with the same focused attention she had seen her best tactical officers give to a battle briefing, and she found herself giving more detail than she had intended because he kept nodding and occasionally asking a clarifying question. And there was something almost hypnotically bizarre about being taken seriously in a maintenance corridor by a young human who smelled like engine grease and spoke with a rounded accent she hadn't heard before. She had told no one about this in 4 days. She hadn't realized how much that had cost her until right now. He came back 3 hours later with protein bars, 2 sealed nutrient packets he'd apparently sourced from the medical bay by telling the medic he had a personal deficiency, and a small thermal blanket he claimed had fallen off the inventory manifest 6 months ago and would not be missed. He also brought a small stuffed animal, an earth toy, a bear, blue, soft, clearly meant for very young children. He held it out toward Tay with the same careful slowness, and Tay, who had not made a sound in hours, reached up and took it with both hands and clutched it to her chest and made a small noise that Arina had not heard her make in 4 days, a sound of pure, uncalculated contentment. Arina looked away before the human could see her face. She heard him settle against the opposite wall, heard the small sounds of the twins waking, of Sylve explaining the situation to them in whispered Solvethi with the authority of a 7-year-old who considered herself the family's primary intelligence officer. Can I ask you something? He said. You already are, she said, because deflection was the safest response. The marks on your throat, he said, and she tensed, but his voice was careful, not invasive. They were darker when I first found you. They're a little brighter now. Is that good? She was silent for a moment. No one had noticed that before. It was the kind of thing you needed to already care about someone to track. Yes, she said. It is good. What do they mean, if you don't mind? She debated. Then she said, they are a bond marker. Solvethi females who carry or raise young. The marks respond to the body's state. When we are depleted, they dim. When we are... She paused. When the body believes safety is possible, they brighten. He was quiet for a moment. Then, so me showing up made them brighter? The food made them brighter, she said. He accepted this with a nod, as if he understood she was offering him the diplomatic version and was willing to take it. She found she respected that more than she wanted to. What happened to their father? He asked. She had not expected that question, not the directness of it. He died in the 42nd engagement, she said, 3 years ago. He was standing 20 meters from where I was standing. I saw it. She said it the way she had learned to say it, flat, factual, without the part underneath, the part that was a room she locked and never entered. He was the best man I ever knew. He believed the war would end and we would go home to Velthos and raise our children and grow old in the cold. She paused. He was right about some of it. Liam said nothing for a moment. Then, I'm sorry. 2 words. She had received formal condolences from admirals. She had received memorial citations. She had received the Solvethi military's official acknowledgement of service and loss, stamped in gold foil and absolutely meaningless. 2 words from a young human engineer in a maintenance corridor hit her somewhere those citations had never reached. She said nothing, but she did not look away this time. The crisis came on the 3rd day. Orina had known, with the fatalistic certainty of a veteran, that peace was never as durable as it looked. She had been calculating the odds of discovery since the first day. She had estimated roughly 40%. She had been working to reduce that probability through careful behavior modification, keeping the girls quiet, managing the heat drain to stay below detectable threshold, coaching Sylve in particular about sound discipline. She had not accounted for Mira. Mira, who at 4 cycles had apparently inherited her father's complete and total inability to stay still, had somehow acquired from Liam a small diagnostic tablet he used for maintenance logging. She had been playing with it quietly for an hour. And then she had, with the particular genius of small children for creating chaos from nothing, accidentally transmitted a diagnostic ping to the ship's central system using the exact frequency code that triggered the hull breach alert protocol. The alarm was loud. The response was immediate. Captain Farrow, a compact woman in her 50s with the expression of someone who had seen every possible way a freight run could go wrong, arrived at the maintenance corridor with 2 crew members and a hand scanner before Liam could intercept her. She found Arina standing, which was the correct tactical decision because sitting was vulnerable. She found 4 children behind Arina, and she found Liam standing slightly in front of the group with the very specific posture of someone who knows they have made a decision they can't undo and has decided not to apologize for it. Liam, the captain said, with the tone of someone placing the period at the end of a very long sentence. Captain Farrow, he said. How long? 3 days. The captain looked at Arina. Arina met her eyes without flinching. The captain's scanner ran its pass, read the Solvethi markers, read the children's biosignatures, read whatever additional data it collected. The captain looked at it. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. The Nexovani Accord? She said. Arina was surprised. The captain saw that, and something that might have been grim satisfaction crossed her face. I ran transit routes through the neutral zone for 8 years, she said. I know what's in that treaty. I know what it did to Solvethi command officers. She looked at Liam. You should have told me. I was going to, he said. After Sifra? Yeah. Captain Farrow was silent for 3 seconds. Then she looked at Arina, and she said something that landed like the first warmth after a long winter. We're on schedule. 4 hours out from Sifra. I'll need you to stay in this corridor until we dock. Can you manage that? Arina said, We have been managing it for 3 days. The captain almost smiled. So you have. She looked at her crew members, both of whom had the expressions of people choosing not to have an opinion about a situation above their pay grade. Log it as an unlisted life support diagnostic. We'll sort the manifest discrepancy at dock. She turned to go, and then stopped and turned back and looked at Liam one more time. You cost me a meal bar diagnostic tablet and approximately 4 days of undetected heat drain, Mr. Walsh. I know, he said. The heat drain I'll log as equipment malfunction. She paused. The meal bar you can take out of your own rations. She left. Liam turned back to Arina. She was looking at him with the expression she had been wearing more and more in the last 3 days, the one she did not have a word for yet, but was beginning to suspect was the Solvethi equivalent of trust, which her people called something that translated roughly as the weight you give to another person's choices. You could have been removed from your post, she said. Yeah. You knew that when you sat down in that corridor. He shrugged, and she was beginning to understand that the shrug was his particular form of understatement. You had 4 kids and no food. What was I supposed to do? She thought about the question seriously, the way she thought about all serious questions. In my culture, she said slowly, what you did would be called varath, a word for placing someone else's survival above your own accounting. It is what we say of soldiers who protect retreating civilians, what we say of parents. She paused. We do not say it of strangers. He was quiet, processing that. Then he said, What do you say of strangers who do it? She looked at him for a long moment. We invent new words, she said. Safara Station smelled like recycled atmosphere and heated metal, and about 12 different kinds of cooking from 12 different cultures. And Arina stood at the docking hatch with 4 girls arrayed behind her, and breathed it in, and felt, for the first time in what seemed like a geological era, something approaching the possibility of a future. Liam stood beside her. He had brought Tay's blue bear, which Tay had left in the maintenance corridor, and which he had gone back to retrieve without being asked. Sylvain was looking at the station through the porthole with wide eyes. The twins were arguing quietly about something. Tay was holding the bear and leaning against Arina's leg with the entire weight of her small body. Your contact, Liam said. You trust them? I trust them enough, she said, which is the most any Solvethi general will ever admit. He smiled, the teeth showing warmth threat she had stopped flinching at 3 days ago. What will you do? She asked. When you dock, the captain knows. The manifest is altered. There may be questions. I'll manage, he said, in the tone of someone who had always managed by not accounting for the cost in advance. She reached into the interior pocket of her uniform. She had kept one thing from her old life, not for sentiment, though sentiment was present, but because it had practical value. A commander's seal, small, made of Velthos blackstone, etched with the sigil of the Third Fleet and her own rank markers. She held it out. He looked at it. I can't take that. It is not a gift, she said. In Solvethi protocol, this seal is a recognition marker. If you ever enter Solvethi space, or formerly Solvethi space, which is most of the neutral zone, anyone who reads this will know you acted with Verath toward one of ours. She paused. It will not make you safe everywhere, but it will make you less likely to be shot in certain corridors. He took it slowly, turned it in his hands. The black stone caught the light from the porthole. The marks on your throat, he said without looking up. They're bright now. She said nothing. That's good, right? He said. She looked at her daughters, Sylvae with her clenched fists slowly opening, the twins tangled together, Tay and her blue bear and her small, warm weight against Arena's leg. And then she looked at this human, who had sat down in a maintenance corridor and decided, for reasons that defied any strategic calculation she could perform, that their survival was worth the cost of his. Yes, she said, it is very good. The docking hatch opened. The noise of Safara spilled in. Voices, movement, the complicated alive noise of a place that had not yet decided what it was, where species and histories and futures tangled together in a mess that sometimes looked like chaos and sometimes looked like something else entirely. Sylvae took her hand. The twins surged forward. Tay held the bear. Arena crossed the threshold. She looked back once. He was still standing at the hatch, the black stone in his hand, watching them go. He raised one hand. The flat palm gesture she now knew meant farewell, or maybe something more than farewell, the word humans used when they wanted to say, I see you, without saying it. She held his gaze for one moment. Then she pressed two fingers to the marks on her throat, the Solvethi gesture for, I carry this, and turned away into the noise and the light and the possible future. Some things cannot be taken from you, her mother had told her once, during the long Velthos winters. Not by councils, not by treaties, not by war. The warmth another person has given you lives in the body and becomes your own. Arena had always thought that was sentiment, the kind of thing people said to survive the cold. She was beginning to think her mother had been doing what Solvethi generals never admitted to doing, the thing that kept them alive when strategy failed and plans dissolved and the marks on their throats went gray in the dark. She had been telling the truth.